Captain Midnight.
This video is brought to you by Nebula. There are few things I love on this earth as much as a good television show. It's been that way since I was a kid, and honestly, I have to be a little cautious after praising first episodes and first seasons, because I think I have a tendency to get caught up in what I see as the limitless potential of a TV show, instead of just talking about the material put in front of me. But that potential is so exciting to me, especially getting to watch shows improve throughout their early years, from Babylon 5 and Seinfeld to more recent shows like Succession or Better Call Saul. I love being able to watch these projects become more confident and robust in their storytelling, characters, and performances, and locate their strengths in a way that just wasn't possible without the trial and error of the early going. Let's face it, in many ways, the medium of television has always been film's disreputable little brother, cursed from the very beginning to often put selling soap and shaving cream ahead of artistry. Great TV can and has risen above that, and when that happens, I think it can be an incredible thing. And to me, maybe the single most defining aspect of television, the thing that makes it feel totally distinct from film, is how much time you spend with its characters. Whether it's drama or comedy, I have such a different relationship as a viewer to Don Draper after 92 episodes of Mad Men, or Daphne Moon after 264 episodes of Frasier than I do with any film character. You get to know these characters like the back of your hand, their strengths, their foibles, and finding delight in the ways that they can still surprise you after years of spending time with them. I'm not saying that this long-term relationship to the audience makes them better characters than what film has to offer, just that it's unquestionably unique. And I'm afraid the last 10 years of television has seen that uniqueness diminish. HBO's Game of Thrones prequel House of the Dragon just wrapped up season 2 with a truncated 8-episode season. It will probably not be back on our screen for literally years. This feels like the culmination of a trend that's been going on for over a decade. Less episodes and far more time between those episodes. I think it's becoming a real problem, and in this video I want to go over why, and how I think it represents television giving up one of its greatest strengths. Before I get into it, I should remind you to hit all the buttons and subscribe and the bell and, the rest of it. Oh, and one thing that I'm adding in here at the last minute is that while I was writing this last week, a video from Adam Conover called How Streaming Destroyed TV went up. There's a decent amount of crossover in what we talk about, so I felt like I should mention it, but I think we ultimately took our videos in pretty different directions. It's a good one though, and I'm gonna link that one down in the description in case you want to check it out as well. Okay, so this is the part where I might lose some people, because for a moment at least, I want to talk about some very, very old television. I'm sure you've heard of Star Trek, the original series, Kirk, Spock, and the gang, but there's a decent chance you haven't heard of Trek creator Gene Roddenberry's show before that, The Lieutenant. It's a good show, I like it. It's remembered as being ahead of its time and canceled far too soon, lasting only one season. The thing is though, when you actually sit down to watch that season, you realize it's 29 episodes long. To put that in perspective, Stranger Things, which began in 2016, has only managed 5 more episodes than The Lieutenant in 4 seasons, which was a show that ran from September of '63 to April of '64. I understand this isn't a perfect comparison. Stranger Things episodes are much longer, but I think it manages to speak to how different TV was back then compared to today. Before really 2013 or so, any show as successful as Stranger Things would have been in its viewers' lives much more. New seasons would probably feel less like a movie-like event and more like inviting an old friend back after not seeing them for a few months. And that may sound corny, but I put it that way very purposefully. The weekly schedule, the sheer amount of stories and plots that you saw these characters go through, tuning in every week and weaving them into the fabric of your life, it all added up to something that gave you a very different relationship than you have with a group of characters you see once every 2 to 4 years for a few hours. Now, I'm not under the illusion that this is going to come back. There's no world where people under 60 all decide to start setting aside their Thursday nights and making sure to be in front of their TV at a specific time to watch a show. And that's fine. I, like most people, prefer to watch my TV on my schedule, not on some TV networks. But there are other things from old television that I think recent TV could take some lessons from. I've cited this before, but to me, the biggest TV news story that broke this year is this chart showing the most streamed shows of 2023, nearly all of which are old shows. I feel like not nearly enough attention has been paid to this fact. I've seen a lot of articles, including one from the New York Times, citing nostalgia as the biggest reason here. And while I'm sure that plays a huge role, I just don't see it. I'm sure people in the US were nostalgic for their childhoods in the economic downturn of the early 70s, but you didn't see reruns of I Love Lucy smashing then current hits like All in the Family in the ratings. There's an audience for what TV has become, but I think these numbers indicate that there's still a massive audience for what TV had been for 50 plus years before that too. And that audience is not really being served in this current television landscape. So they're turning to older shows, including ones that are probably new to them and weren't even massive hits in their time, like Suits. Now, I'm not going to claim that Suits is the height of artistic television. It's not. Nothing against it, but I was a little baffled that this was the show that TikTok latched onto. Honestly, it probably wouldn't make my top 15 lawyer shows. Still, with its mostly episodic format and a 9-season run that aired yearly for almost a decade, it's a show that's emblematic of everything that this new era of TV has left behind. Outside of really just network cop and doctor shows mostly aimed at older viewers. From an industry perspective, I think that's clearly been a disaster. All these big streaming services have huge churn problems. People cancel their subscriptions right after the show they're watching ends. And I think longer seasons would help a lot with that. But more importantly, I think the old system was far better for writers creatively. Shows like The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, and Mad Men were all so lauded at the time for breaking away from the conventions of television. You wouldn't find a case of the week with a morally upright lead here. No, these were serialized shows with morally ambiguous characters at their center. They were rightfully applauded for breaking from conventions and pushing boundaries. Now though, with the benefit of hindsight, I think it's worth considering that these 3 shows, along with some other anti-hero favorites from that era like The Shield, weren't just great because of the ways they broke from TV convention, but also in the ways that they embraced those conventions. All of those showrunners had tons of experience writing old school TV, from The X-Files to sitcoms like Becker. Sopranos creator David Chase may have felt really frustrated by the limitations of the very episodic Rockford Files, which he wrote for a long time, but he brought all of that episodic experience to The Sopranos to craft serialized episodes that still feel satisfying in and of themselves, with real beginnings, middle, and ends that actually land, that don't just feel like formless, here's 55 more minutes of a long movie that you get with a lot of streaming shows now. And I think the same is true for all those shows I mentioned. Mad Men works as a complete text. Season 5 works as a satisfying 13-episode arc of TV, which by the way also feels luxuriously long in today's diminished 8 to 10 episode norm. And an episode like Season 5's At the Codfish Ball hits like a freight train as an individual episode of the show, with a statement about these characters, and especially Sally, that feels unique to this specific script. Episodes have their own very unique identity, something that showrunners coming straight from indie films I feel often struggle with. Crafting episodes that work both in the context of the season as a whole and as an entertaining piece of TV on its own. Mad Men was more cinematic than your average show in 2007, but it also understood the strengths of its own medium in a way that far more expensive movie-like streaming shows just don't today. Now, anyone who's read a lot about TV production knows that everyone involved tends to describe creating a 22-plus episode season of television as exhausting, difficult, and almost impossible. For that reason alone, I think coming down from that number to a more reasonable 15 to 18 would be ideal. Still, I can't help but love those long seasons, because of how many opportunities there are to play with the show's tones and conventions. There's this idea in contemporary TV fandom that only the destination matters, that a TV show should be about its season-long story and nothing else. Often, these discussions will use the word filler to describe more episodic monster or case of the week episodes that don't push the season-long narrative forward. And I have a real bone to pick with this line of thinking. Filler, as it applies to TV, did make sense in the very specific context of anime, where episodes were produced to keep the show going while they waited for new manga chapters to adapt. That makes sense, but the way it's been applied to American TV is often really frustrating. Something like the X-Files episode Ice, in which Mulder and Scully get caught up in a great riff on the Thing, does almost nothing to push forward the series' mythology. And it's not filler. It is, in fact, an example of what the show is best at, and its defining legacy. There's some great mythology-focused episodes, but if that's what you're watching the show for, you're gonna come away disappointed in the end. Because The X-Files was greatest when it was doing what it was created to do, being a 90s update on the Kolchak the Night Stalker Monster of the Week formula. It's at its weakest when it's trying to piece together 9 seasons of lore that stopped being coherent after season 5. And yes, I do recognize that is a fault of the show. But I think approaching the Monster of the Week episodes like they're inherently lesser is a depressing side effect of the last 10 years of streaming TV. The fact is, the Monster of the Week episodes are formulaic, but they allow for far more tonal experimentation than most serialized streaming shows do. Something like Netflix's You, which on the surface is less formulaic episode to episode, ends up being far more samey, as the show's tone isn't as comfortable taking wild swings like X-Files was. X-Files could go from an earnestly mean and scary episode like Home to pure comedy like Small Potatoes with ease. With You, you're gonna have this dark and broadly satirical tone in just about every episode. When I look at these two shows and how they operate side by side, I can't help but feel shocked that X-Files is considered the old-fashioned one. There's just so much more variety there, and a large part of that is the amount of episodes that they had to work with. Now, I understand that when I make an argument for the kind of TV that produced Suits, many will see that as an argument for embracing mediocrity. After all, Suits, sorry to beat on it again, is a fairly cheap show, especially by today's standards. Not very visually ambitious, and is probably more notable for its consistency than its high quality. I mean, isn't the massive budgets of current TV with its larger scope and focused storytelling superior to some okay USA Network show? That makes sense as an argument, and as someone who loved TV back in the 2000s, I can tell you the smart critical opinion to have back then was that American TV would be better if it were more like television in the UK. And no disrespect to UK TV, which has produced a lot of great stuff, but it's just not a perspective that I agree with. Tight, focused, shorter shows can be great. Of course they can be. But when they're not, I often find myself wishing that they had just been a movie instead. The fact is, I think TV seasons that are structured like films run just as much risk of feeling mediocre and bloated as longer, more episodic seasons do, if not more so. Battlestar Galactica Season 2, with its mixture of ongoing season-long narratives and episodic problems for the characters to solve, is 20 episodes long, and it's far better paced than, say, Netflix's Lost in Space Season 1, which had 10 episodes that feel like they could have been shaved down to 4 to 6. And once we start getting that low, especially 4, like, why not just make it a movie? I think once you're basically working with something that's feature length, you're not using any of the things that TV offers as opposed to film, and I'd probably rather just see it in a theater anyway. I'll always be a little bit obsessed with the idea of fixing those Jessica Jones and Luke Cage Netflix shows. I know that only gets goofier as the years go on, but these were two shows that I was very excited for when they started, and my disappointment in them is when I really started to think about the drawbacks of the Netflix model for the first time. On the surface, every season of these shows seems too long. They fill out 13 episodes, but have enough material for maybe 8. And that sucks, so it made sense to read that the writers of Luke Cage were begging Netflix for less episodes in its final season. Taking a step back though, that just seems completely insane. We're talking about shows with a PI and hero for hire, characters created to constantly generate new stories that lend themselves to having any episodic plots in their shows. But no, because this was a mid-2010s streaming show, it had to be serialized with almost no episodic elements. They could not lean into their lead characters' obvious strengths as story engines. Yes, something like the format of NCIS is limiting as hell, but I don't think I can honestly say that this commitment to ultra serialization was artistically a better format for these shows. I think there's a balance that can be struck here. And for too long, streaming shows have been terrified to embrace that balance and the apparently uncool old TV aspects that come with it. Which leads me to HBO's Perry Mason. God, I know this video is all over the place, just hear me out. When HBO announced they were remaking Perry Mason, I was through the roof excited. Now, part of that is I'm a sicko who loves ancient TV and has seen tons of the 1957 lawyer drama, but the larger part of it is what I thought they could be attempting. See, Perry Mason is about as old TV case of the week as you can possibly get. And I thought HBO would try to use that format while bringing the level of production, nuance, and polish that we know they're capable of. Basically, rescuing the format from the old networks and showing it to an audience in an exciting new light. Something that would feel bold and unexpected in the landscape of 2020's prestige TV. Honestly, they could call it elevated episodic TV or something obnoxious like that, and I wouldn't even care. I'd just be so happy to see great TV writers tackle the format with HBO resources and HBO expectations. But that just didn't happen. The show came and went and was a solid, very serialized noir where poor Perry didn't even become a lawyer until deep into the first season. And honestly, it broke my heart. Because watching episodes of Homicide: Life on the Street, Hill Street Blues, or LA Law, I think there's still so much life left here. So much quality being left on the table, and so much being left behind in these shows' ultra-serialized short seasons. Now, those ultra-serialized short seasons should exist, but they shouldn't be the only format synonymous with quality TV. Episodic TV has and can be amazing, and I would love to see it more outside of the old networks and their aging cop and hospital franchises. I understand that as a format, episodic TV has some drawbacks, and I'm not trying to go back to the days where it seemed like all characters on television got the Men in Black memory wipe between episodes. I often think about how much more interesting some of these old shows would be if that wasn't the case. Nor do I want to do away with serialized elements. I love serialization on TV, and I always have. I just think it can often be used better within the scaffolding of episodic stories. And for a while there, it felt like TV was getting better and better at melding the two together into something truly interesting and special. But somewhere along the way, that progress got lost, and many in the industry ended up thinking that serialization and short seasons were the shortcut to quality. I think that's limiting what television has the potential to be, and I want to see TV embrace a future where it's neither wallowing in the past and not moving forward, but also isn't terrified of embracing so many of the things that people loved about it. That people are going back to 20-year-old shows because of what they still love about it. I think that future is possible. But at the end of the day, if you ask me if I prefer an 8-episode, expensive-looking prestige show format or the sprawling and sometimes far more messy format of like a Star Trek Deep Space Nine, I'm taking DS9 every time. It's always fun to talk TV, but now I want to talk Nebula. Nebula is a boutique streaming service that features my entire back catalog, including some exclusive videos. Now, their hit series Jetlag, a really fun reality competition show, just started season 11, and there's never been a better time to jump aboard and check it out, especially because now there's tons of episodes to binge. There's so many creators on there too, from Lindsay Ellis, Be Kind Rewind, Nando V Movies, and Patrick H. Willems, alongside so many others encompassing so many genres of video. I think one of the most exciting aspects of Nebula is all the originals they're getting out into the world. So whether you're checking out Patrick's movie or Real Life Lore's intensely well-researched show about modern conflicts, there's gonna be something for you. So get 40% off an annual membership of Nebula now at nebula.tv/captainmidnight. That's nebula.tv/captainmidnight. And you can find that link down in the description.
Here's a special tip for the fellas and girls who have not already joined Captain Midnight's new 1940 Flight Patrol. You'd better hurry up and join at once because there's a big adventure ahead. The thing to do now is to get started because we're going to have not only barrels of fun, but loads of free gifts and prizes, too.